Night 1. The Visitor in the Snow. The wind howled through the small, isolated town of Hollow's End. A thick blanket of snow covered the village, muffling every sound. On this night, Jane Mullins was the only one awake in her house. Sitting by the window, her mind lost in thought. Her husband and children were sound asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the terror that was about to unfold. Jane sipped her cocoa, enjoying the peaceful quiet of Christmas Eve, until she noticed something strange. Out by the road, just beyond the faint glow of their porch light, was a figure standing perfectly still in the snow. The figure was tall, cloaked in a tattered black coat, and wore a hat that cast a shadow over its face. But as Jane watched, she realized something that made her skin crawl. The figure had no visible face. A chill ran down her spine as she closed her curtains, trying to shake off the feeling that she was being watched. She convinced herself it was just a trick of the light, maybe even a snowman someone had set up as a prank. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the image of the faceless figure from her mind. Suddenly, a loud knock sounded at the front door. Jane jumped, her heart pounding. Who would come to their house in the middle of a snowstorm? She peeked through the curtains, and there, standing on her doorstep, was the faceless figure, its head tilted as if it could see right through her. Terrified, she ran upstairs to wake her husband. Together, they called the police, but when they arrived, the figure had vanished, leaving nothing but a pair of deep footprints in the snow. The officers found no one, and as they left, they warned the family to stay indoors and lock all windows and doors. Jane barely slept that night, haunted by the vision of the faceless figure. In the morning, her family tried to forget about the strange encounter, dismissing it as a prank, but deep down, Jane felt that something sinister had visited them that Christmas Eve, and she would never forget the hollow emptiness where its face should have been. Night 2. The Whispering Dolls. A year passed, and though Jane tried to move on from the events of the previous Christmas, she couldn't shake the feeling that something evil still lingered. When Christmas Eve arrived again, she put on a brave face for her family, decorating the tree and preparing the house for another quiet night. As she unpacked a box of old Christmas decorations, she came across a small box labeled dolls. Inside, she found 3 porcelain dolls she had never seen before. Each doll had delicate features, hand-painted eyes, and wore Victorian-style clothing. There was something off about them, though an unsettling lifelike quality that made her hesitate. But her daughter, Emily, fell in love with them immediately and begged her mother to let her keep them. Reluctantly, Jane agreed, placing the dolls on a shelf in Emily's room. That night, Jane tucked her children into bed, telling them stories of Santa and reindeer. But her mind kept drifting to those strange dolls. Later, as Jane lay in bed, she heard a faint whisper coming from her daughter's room. Thinking it was just her imagination, she tried to ignore it. But the whispering grew louder, almost as if it was chanting. She rushed to Emily's room, only to find her daughter sound asleep. But the dolls, they were no longer on the shelf. Instead, they were sitting on the edge of the bed, facing the door as if they had been watching. Jane's blood ran cold. She gathered the dolls and took them downstairs, placing them in the box and locking it in the basement. She told herself it was just her mind playing tricks, that dolls couldn't move on their own. But as she climbed the stairs to return to bed, she heard the sound of tiny footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting to see one of her children, but there was no one. There only the faint echo of footsteps and a soft whisper that said, "We're coming back." The next morning, the dolls were gone, and no one could explain where they had disappeared. Jane's family tried to reassure her that it was just a dream, but she knew that those dolls had been more than toys. They were something ancient and evil, and they had come for her family. Night 3. The Shadows in the Attic. By the third Christmas Eve, Jane's family was tired of her anxieties and strange fears. They tried to have a cheerful celebration, filling the house with laughter and lights. But Jane couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for them, something darker and more terrifying than before. That evening, as she was putting away the last of the Christmas decorations, she heard a creaking noise coming from the attic. She hadn't gone up there in years, and no one else ever seemed to go up there, so the sound unsettled her. Jane decided to investigate, thinking maybe it was just an animal or loose floorboard. With her heart pounding, she climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. The air was cold and thick with dust, and the only light came from a single, flickering bulb. As she reached the top of the stairs, she felt a rush of cold air, as though something was breathing down her neck. She froze, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. And that's when she saw them, the shadows. They moved along the walls, twisting and writhing, their shapes shifting as if they were alive. She wanted to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. One shadow grew taller, taking on a vaguely human form, and began to speak in a raspy whisper. "We've been waiting," it said. "Year after year, we come for those who disturb the silence of Christmas night." Jane tried to turn and run, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The shadows closed in around her, their whispers growing louder until they filled her mind with visions of terror, images of her family, lost and screaming, trapped in darkness forever. At that moment, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned and saw her husband standing there, his face pale with worry. He had heard her climbing to the attic and came to find her. Jane sobbed as he led her downstairs, but when she glanced back, the shadows were gone, leaving only an empty, silent attic behind. But that night, as she lay in bed, she heard the whispers again. The shadows were not gone. They were waiting, biding their time. And as the clock struck midnight, she realized they would return every Christmas Eve, hungry for more. Each Christmas Eve haunted Jane and her family with a new terror, a relentless curse that seemed to grow stronger each year. To this day, they say that on Christmas Eve in Hollow's End, strange figures can be seen in the snow. Dolls whisper in the night, and shadows twist and writhe in empty attics, waiting for the next soul to stumble upon their dark presence.